Welcome to the Berkeley Research Group Thinkset Podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Newland. Berkeley Research Group is a leading global strategic advisory and expert consulting firm, providing independent advice and dispute consulting around the world to corporations, law firms, government agencies, and financial institutions. For more, please visit thinkbrg.com. On today's episode of the Thinkset Podcast, we caught up with BRG Managing Director Larry Fallin to discuss the current business environment in the Middle East, geopolitical developments in the region, and advice he has for others looking to do business in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's hard to imagine that many Americans have an understanding of the region that's on par with Larry's. He's been based in Saudi Arabia since 1979 and has worked with organizations in Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, as well as companies in the U.S. and Europe. That includes advising public and private companies from Global 100 to startups, and a specialization in creating strategies, transformations, turnarounds, and organizational value through innovation. Larry joins us today from his office in Riyadh to talk about what he sees on the horizon for one of the world's most turbulent and misunderstood regions. Larry, thanks so much for joining us today. How's the weather in Saudi Arabia?
Well, it's not too bad. It was only 114 today. So,
oh, man.
Yeah, well, you wake up in the morning and it's already 100. So,
yeah, and I thought California in the summer was bad. So diving right into it, though, you first started working in Saudi Arabia in 1979. What led you there originally?
It was an accident, actually. I was working for the state of Hawaii airports, and I was invited to give a talk at an Airport Operators Council International Conference in Montreal. And after my talk, I went back to Hawaii, and I got a call from a person who had been in the audience, a general in the Royal Saudi Air Force. And he asked me if I wanted to come to work for him because he was building 3 international airports with a budget of, at that time, each airport was about $6 billion. And that was 1979. So it was fairly large projects. They were ground up projects. And I was asked to come and put in all the technology and plan all of the passenger flow at 4 times my salary I was making as a state employee. So it turned out to be good.
I imagine that helps with the decision process. Given that you first arrived in 1979, you've been in and around a lot of history over the years. What are some of the moments that stand out? Perhaps moments that personally affected you?
Yeah, when I first arrived in 1979, or March of 79 to be exact, there was very little infrastructure in Saudi Arabia at the time. They were building all of the roads, they were starting their city planning, and of course, as I mentioned, I was working on the large international airports. And it was a pretty open time. It was almost Wild West-like. And Jeddah was, at the time, was a commercial capital of the kingdom, always has been. And it was a fairly, by Saudi standards, liberal city. A lot of females were working. It was pretty open and out and about. And then in November of 1979, they had what's referred to as the Mecca incident, where radicals took over the Grand Mosque in Mecca for several days. And right after that, the religious police stepped in and it went conservative overnight. And then it's been gradually changing. So over the years, I've seen this cultural change in conservatism that ebbs and tides depending on how prominent my favorite ministry, the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice, also known as the religious police, are active. The other thing that has changed dramatically, and I know people on the outside don't see this so much, is the role of females in the society and working. There are starting to be more and more coeducational workplaces, if you will, although the restaurants are still segregated with families and singles and that type of thing. But it's changing slowly, and it's good to see. There's a big push in the work that we're doing on assessing how to best integrate the females into the workforce, increase their labor force participation. In the recent years, there's been a big push, for example, on diversification of the economy to remove itself from an extraction-based economy, that's also known as oil, and other types of mining activities, to a more diversified manufacturing, financial services economy. That's very slow. The government is still heavily entrenched in this process, and it's slowly moving away from a planned economy to a market economy. The changes that are happening in that are quite dramatic. Taxes are coming into play. They have a sugary drink tax. They just doubled the price of tobacco. They lifted some of the subsidies on water and electricity, and this is forcing a big change in the economy. I think on the geopolitical level is a tremendous change in the way Israel is viewed within the kingdom. When I first came in 1979, one of the major jobs of the religious police were every magazine that came into the kingdom, they had people who sat and literally went through every page of every Time, Newsweek type magazine, and they blocked out with black marker pens, they'd block out all reference to Israel, and they'd also take great pains in covering up any cleavage shown from models or actresses, that type of thing, and kissing was covered up with the same thing. Today, that is not so much. There's reference to Israel. Israel's on the map. It wasn't in 1979. In 1979, there was a very large list of commodities known as the Black List that were not allowed within the kingdom because of their perceived or real association with Israel. And so those types of things have changed over the years to the point where now, just tonight before I came and did this podcast, I had lox and bagel sandwich. So it's
They've come a long way in that regard.
It's a long ways. As I mentioned earlier, there was very little infrastructure. The roads were 2-lane, and they went through a lot of villages. 4-wheel drive was pretty much necessary for everything. And traffic accidents then and today are a serious problem within the kingdom. And in fact, per 100,000, Saudi Arabia is among the highest, if not the highest, deaths in road traffic accidents. So it's head-ons, hitting camels, used to be hitting donkeys, not too much donkeys anymore. So it's very dangerous.
Just to interject there, Larry, I know in your work you do a lot of statistical analysis to help drive your recommendations. How do statistics help your understanding of the challenges the Middle East continues to face?
We're actually spending a lot of time on showing people how they can use statistics for their fact-based policymaking. And they are now starting to use those statistics to alter cultural change. One of the things that you have to remember about Saudi Arabia, it is a tribal country. And knowing what tribe and what goes on in those tribes from the different regions are very important. So we measure statistics. We're doing a lot of statistics around housing because housing is a big push, around labor market, understanding who's working, who's not working, why, what's the cause, that type of thing.
So using all of that, keeping in mind that most Americans haven't had the opportunity to travel to the Middle East, what is it that you think most Americans and even other people around the world don't understand about the Gulf region, specifically when it comes to the business climate?
I think one of the things that people don't understand, because it's very difficult coming from a democracy, is that A, it's a kingdom, and B, it is very hard to divorce religion from the government or to divorce religion from the everyday life. It is there, it is what it is, and you need to accept that. The other part of it is this is not a culture where it's easy just to come in and say, "Hi, my name is Larry and I have a deal for you because I know more than you." It takes a long time to build the relationships. It's very important to understand the family relationship, who's married to who's whose daughter, who's whose cousin, what tribe they're from, and to understand how these things all play out and how you're going to go for an hour meeting and 15 minutes of it is going to be on social customs. That is, you're going to have your Arabic coffee, you're going to have your tea, and you're going to chat about, I know your cousin and I know your brother. Then you'll get down to business. And oftentimes I've been in meetings where the whole meeting was social. And as you're walking out the door, you conclude your business. I think that's difficult for people who are pressed by time because in a lot of ways, time has no value in this culture. So I have proposals right now that I'm starting to see results on and win that I submitted 8-9 months ago. Unfortunately, oftentimes that does not mean the schedule moved 8 or 9 months. So this is a very difficult thing, I think, for a lot of people to understand how slow sometimes things move and that type of thing. One of the phrases that you get to know very, very soon here is Bukra Inshallah. And that's God willing tomorrow. And you hear that a lot. And the other thing, you have to learn to know the calendar. Of course, it's the Hijra calendar, not the Gregorian calendar. So you have two major breaks in the year. One is Ramadan, where everybody fasts for 30 days, and the other is Hajj. And it moves. So every year it's 2 weeks earlier. So this year it started on May 25th. Next year it's going to start on around May 10th or so. So what happens is about a month before Ramadan, you'll start hearing things like, well, we'll just do this after Ramadan. So everything gets pushed till after Ramadan. The Muslims during Ramadan in the government offices only have to work 6 hours. And if they're sleeping, there's nothing you can do about it. If they're fasting, which everybody is fasting. So you have to recognize that, like I said, today the temperature was 114 and you don't drink water and you don't eat, the amount of energy that exists in those period of times is zero. So it's a challenge. Between Ramadan and Hajj are 60 days and you start trying to get things done, and this is why we're having some success in getting some contracts in place. But the government's going to shut down for 11 days for Hajj. And there will be nobody available to do anything. And right now, there's a great number of people on vacation because school starts up the day that the Hajj break ends. So everybody's on vacation, and you see these things going on around the calendar. And so you've got to time everything. So that's how I figured it out.
You and I talked a little bit before the call. The current situation over in the Middle East right now with Qatar and the dispute that they're in with the other Gulf nations. You had mentioned that you can't fly over to Qatar. You'd have to fly to Europe and then back down, even though that would add maybe 6-8 hours to a flight.
Yeah.
How do you see the situation evolving in the coming weeks and months?
Well, I think things are changing behind the scenes. I'm confident of that from conversations that I have. Publicly, you have two stubborn dinosaurs trying to figure out how they can save face. And the geopolitics of the region are such that you're seeing weird shifting in quiet alliances among the major players: Turkey, Iran, the Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and that lone person out there, Israel. So you're seeing a shift because Saudi Arabia is not friendly with Iran, although Iran is claiming that they're willing to discuss this. And I think what's going on behind the scenes is Iran and Turkey are making the power play. And this is very uncomforting for the Emirates and the Saudis So I think you'll see some slight shifts and a break in some other areas to offset this stalemate for right now. But Qatar is increasingly isolated. They just lifted their visas for 80 countries to attract people there. That's one of the ways that they're going to try to enhance their construction efforts for the World Cup in 2022. And I get emails now from Qatar Airlines asking me if I want to fly because they'll give me like 75% discount on business class. So I can't fly them because I can't get to Doha, but that's what's going on there.
Obviously, just listening to you talk, you've seen a lot in 4 decades in the region. If you could talk to Larry Fallin in 1979 and give him one or two pieces of advice to how to best succeed in the region, what would they be?
One of the interesting statistics that you come across is that roughly only 25% of Americans hold a passport. And so if you're outside that 25%, you suddenly show up in a country like Saudi Arabia, you don't realize things are really different. So you have to accept that they're going to do the things the way they do the things here in Saudi Arabia. And again, as I said earlier, you cannot get away from the religious conservatism and the family side of doing things and the wasfa. Wasfa is an Arabic term for favor. And so you learn how to leverage cousins, brothers, aunts, and uncles for wasfa, favors to get access to things. And that takes a while. And when I first arrived, of course, I knew zero people. And I had the fortune of having a good, strong network of support. And then I started mentoring young Saudis. And some of those Saudis today, a couple of them are deputy ministers. One of them is a minister. Two of them are ambassadors. One of them is the CEO of a very large $25 billion conglomerate. And that's taken me 40 years to develop that relationship. And so it doesn't happen overnight. And I often laugh at people who come here, especially construction people, people who are going to get, quote, projects. I'll meet up with them and they'll say, well, I have this prince. And I say, and what does that help you with? Because the naivety here is, if I have a prince, I'm in good shape. Well, there's 12,000 of them. So, and they're not all in the line for anything. And there are princesses who have a lot more silent power than a lot of princes. So you have to look at how all of these things balance out and not accept what it is. I mean, trading is their business since, you can read about it in the Bible, the spice trails.
It goes that far back. To wrap us up, Larry, both from a general perspective and one specific to the Middle East, what advice would you give to business people trying to get their arms around all these different things involved in the culture? Is it just preaching patience, or is there anything else in particular that you would highly recommend somebody to do to prepare them to try and do business within the kingdom and around the region?
There's several things. One is patience is it, and building trust. You have to spend a lot of time gaining trust and confidence. I tell people that every day. If you say you're going to do something and have it by Wednesday, have it by Wednesday. Don't make excuses for Thursday. The second thing is understand that this country particularly has been literally raped by dishonest people in terms of not fulfilling contracts, delivering really crappy stuff, and in some cases, depleting their inventory with fourth generation old stuff. And you just got to be upfront and honest and deal with it that way. I think the other thing is you have to understand how to align consortiums and groups of people and groups of organizations to actively pursue things. So you have to be a fairly good team builder.
Not quite the straightforward way a lot of people are used to doing business here in the U.S. and certainly around the globe. Larry, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. Good luck. Stay cool. If it's still 114 out there, I don't know what you can do. I hope you have a pool.
No, I don't.
We'll look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thank you.
This Thinkset Podcast is brought to you by the Berkeley Research Group. You can subscribe to the podcast and access other content from Thinkset Magazine by going to thinksetmag.com. I'm Eddie Newland, and thanks for listening. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the opinions, position, or policy of Berkeley Research Group or its other employees and affiliates.